Okay, this is the January 17th, 2017 Ethics Board for the City of Tallahassee. It's 4 o'clock. We're in the City Commission chamber here in beautiful downtown Tallahassee, Florida, right across from the Capitol, where they are about to have all kinds of fun that we don't have to participate in. So that's the call to order. We're just going to go right down the agenda here. We have the minutes from the last meeting, from our December 20th meeting. Does anyone have any comments, corrections?
I just have some technical corrections at this point.
Okay, but nothing substantive?
I'm trying to read them real fast
Okay.
right now. So.
Would you like me to come back to it?
Please.
Okay, we will come back to that in a moment. We will skip ahead to, actually, I'm going to jump to number 4, since you know that I don't do numbers well, and introduce Mr. Brian Smith, down here on my right, on the left for the viewers. Mr. Smith is the appointment from Florida A&M University. He is our new member, appointed in November to replace Mr. Ochitayo. He has his law degree from John Marshall, has degrees in public management and political science from other universities, one of which is Florida A&M, and then one from some disreputable out-of-state organization. Sorry. I can't help myself. Currently, he works at A&M and serves as the University Ombudsman and Special Assistant to the Vice President for Student Affairs, which is if it's anything like FSU, is a non-stop thrill ride, I'm going to say. A couple other things. He has taught juvenile justice, criminal justice, conflict resolution, and ethics. He has been a mediator. He was the chair and a member of the Board of Ethics for DeKalb County, which from our perspective is the asterisk on your career, for a decade. The early part of the from 2003 to 2013. He has served in numerous other positions and comes to us very highly recommended by the university and by a number of folks who I know both reputable and disreputable, which is quite a comment. Mr. Smith, for comments.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I look forward to serving the citizens of Tallahassee and working with you guys. I feel I can learn a lot from you all, and humbled to be chosen, and I'd like to thank Dr. Robertson for appointing me to this board. So I look forward to working with you all, and thank you again for welcoming me here.
Well, again, I will speak on behalf of the other 5 board members here and the staff. We are thrilled to have you. Now, jumping back to item 3, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you are going to go through your multi-part monthly report for us.
I will do so. Provided for your review is my activities for the month since our last meeting. The focus of my activities in the last month and probably for the next several months to come will be educational opportunities for employees of the city to receive ethics education, for members of city-appointed boards and committees to receive ethics education, and then the City Commission is scheduled to receive their annual education on January 25th in the morning. So I am focused on that, and I think here on the report it might give the number of sessions given this month, but there were at least 5 or 6. Provided 3 ethics education sessions to employees, and then also to the Science Advisory Committee, which I did not know we had until recently. I learned a lot. And also to the Environmental Code Enforcement Board, and that is actually a quasi-judicial board. So and there was a new board member, so I got to help orient that board member. One interesting thing is I went out to a power plant, and the name escapes me, and actually did ethics education out at a power plant out Highway 20. So those were interesting folks to speak to. Their concerns are different than, say, the commissioners. They're confronted with different dilemmas. So one thing I've learned is education must be customized. One size does not fit all for ethics education.
Ms. Meadows-Keefe, could you tell us just very briefly about how long these sessions last and kind of what your expectation is coming out of them?
Okay, that's a fair question. In terms of the employees, employees, according to our ordinance, need to receive ethics orientation within the first several months that they're here. I think it's 60 days. I would actually need to look. But so the class would be those that are new, as well as those that require refreshing. The requirement is they receive refreshing every 3 years. So we are going through that process to make sure everyone that needs to be refreshed is refreshed and all the new people are covered. So you had previously received the booklet and reviewed the booklet that they're given for a reference type of thing, and then they're also given city resources. The focus of what I tell them depends on who I am talking to, okay? So I know certain situations, like they're not filing gift disclosure forms, they're not filing a Form 1, but an electric lineman may receive, hey, do you want a football ticket? You did a really good job. So I had an opportunity to talk to them about those things, what's appropriate and what's not. So that's the employees, and I do look at the type of employee. The next type of and so that might take an hour, 2 hours, depending on the composition of the group and their questions. I don't make them sit for the sake of sitting. If it's a seasoned group, we have more of a discussion than we do regurgitating information. So I do try to conform it to who's there. And then for the boards and committees, they have agendas just like ours. So I try to take at most 15 minutes. Most of those boards and committees have representing them an attorney of their own. The Code Enforcement Board, for example, has its own outside counsel, much like we have Mr. Currington. There are also city attorneys there to provide day-to-day guidance. So my role there is to find out the kind of board it is, what its needs are they filing forms or not, common dilemmas they may address as board members, and then I do go through public records law, making sure they forward any emails that they may get in the course and scope of their membership on the board to a city contact person so they may be appropriately archived. I also remind them about the noticed meeting requirements and that 2 or more of them speaking about an issue that may come before their board or committee needs to be noticed and should not happen. So I remind them about all of those things, and then I make sure that they sign that they were there and that they heard and understood, and they also know how to contact me, my email address, and then the number for the ethics and fraud hotline. Okay. So does that answer your question?
It does, but it raised another issue for me. Are you tracking all of the new hires and when people had these, or do you do this on request as the city identifies batches of people? Do they come and say, Julie, we need, these 4 groups done? Who bears that responsibility?
The board and I, as the ethics officer, have oversight over that program, which to me means that I am accountable for making sure that it gets done. It was not necessarily always required that I personally deliver the training. We have Miss Angela Hildreth, who you met, who came. She has provided ethics education to employees in the past and has done so. So to answer your question, I do receive updates of new hires and also people cycling through that are in need of refreshment. We are, at this point in time, working with HR under the reorganization to tighten up a little bit, just to make sure we don't get too many people stacked up that need the education. So we're working collaboratively to make sure that happens more efficiently. Secondly, and I may play this if I can at a subsequent meeting, there's been some great online ethics ed put on the internet. And it's an interactive education where you answer questions, you actually type text in a box. It's not just you going through slides saying, I've read this, or taking kind of a lame quiz. This is actually very impressive to me. It memorializes for the record that you were there and understood. So I think after about a month or two of refinement, we will be exactly where we need to be.
Okay, in terms of that online, could you send that as a link to the board members, and maybe we can do a little homework? I know it's the kind of thing that watching somebody do a presentation and sitting down and doing it yourself are pretty different experiences.
This is something I will need to work with Ellen on to make
If it's
sure.
possible.
I'm sure that it is, but logistics, so you guys can review it, and it's actually good for you to be refreshed yourselves.
Any other questions on this part of the monthly update? Ms. Phillips?
I'm really love the opportunity all the employees have of interacting with you directly, because I think that's important, just to see the face and ask questions. I do want to make a comment, though, that we don't want that to take away from your other job, which is, as the ethics officer for the board. So that, I just want to make sure that it isn't overwhelming to the
Ms.
point.
Meadowski.
Yeah, and I will address that, and I thank you for that. I do feel that it's important that every employee here at the city encounter me or my office at least one time. So what I learned in this conference I went to, in the Kogel conference, that in the city of New York, they have a unit of educators, and they have not gone to online training. They have people going all over New York City providing ethics ed. Of course, that's their job, and their job only. But I feel like once I've hit everybody once that's an employee, I can trust more in the online education and on others to carry that out. But right now I'm feeling that the board, for example, is something a lot of people are curious about and may not have followed. So even if, for example, Angela is doing the education, I want to be invited so that I can be introduced and give a 10-minute description of the board. So I don't anticipate this going on for more than a few months, but I do feel it's very important at this point.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Friedman.
Yeah, in terms of accountability, I assume you have something like a spreadsheet that lists all the different units in the government, and you're making sure that at a certain time, those things are diaried, that you will go out the next time and do whatever needs to be done. Is that correct?
That's correct. And HR is accountable for, actually, with the tracking through PeopleSoft. So they do keep track of that. The thing I'm trying to do is just enhance a little bit the communication between our offices to make sure we're coordinating better.
Great, thank you.
Okay, the next thing is your tracking report.
Yes. Absent any questions,
I would just, I want to make one comment here, because we've talked about it a little bit in the past. On item 93, you say it's open and you're gathering facts. I think as a board, we and it's something we need to talk about more at some point in the future probably, but we need to be a little careful that when we get to this item, if there are things here where we want to ask questions, that we be cautious that certain paths of inquiry belong in a shade meeting and not in a public meeting. If our questions on one of your, whether it's closed or not, on one of your the calls that you received would lead us down the path that of moving toward finding probable cause or whatever, that's not something we ought to be doing in a public meeting initially. We need to take it into a closed room, bring in the court reporter, do our thing, and then make it all available.
And that's 112.324.
Oh, and you're pointing me to Section 112.324 Florida statutes. So just that's something as the board moves forward, I think we just, and hopefully you and Mr. Currington will, keep us on track and not let us get too far out of order with questions. Should we go? I don't see them this month, but I know in the past we've had some questions, and it's a little concerning to me that we not violate anybody's rights by just trying to explore with you things that probably need to be done in a shade meeting.
So if someone comes with a public complaint.
Why don't you say this in the microphone, please?
Okay, so the particular conversation that the chair and I were having prior to the meeting is we've had folks in the past come publicly to the meeting and come to the podium and make what I would consider complaints for us to look at, and so the chair and I and board counsel did discuss the appropriate interaction with such a person, so maybe the board chair wants to talk to what we had talked about right before the meeting, so how we're going to handle those.
Well, again, I think we need to be careful that we follow the process where you're doing that initial evaluation. We've taken the position the board can self-initiate a complaint, but we need to be cautious that we not get too far into the weeds in terms of looking at things about which we might self-initiate a complaint, so that we're having in our public meeting what should initially be in a shade meeting. And I'm not sure, at some point we may want to have a formal written policy on and try to lay out just how far down that path we ought to go, and what the procedure is for the chair stopping a discussion like that on advice of counsel. Mr. Freeman.
It's a question and a statement kind of rolled into one. I mean, you've got, I assume your discussion talked about two different sets of privacy. One being the complainant, one being the person against whom the complaint has been effectively lodged. Obviously, if the person who is the complainant makes their complaint in public, there's really nothing much that can be done. You can't stop a citizen for saying what they say. However, at the point he makes the statement, you shouldn't make any further statements, because now you come into the rights of the person against whom the complaint is made. And I think that if one remembers that a complaint on its face is one thing, the inquiry we do would be termed, at least in my parlance, a preliminary inquiry, and then the full would be the thing that would be discussed in the shadow meeting. Once you hit the point where you're even considering looking at it as a preliminary complaint, you shouldn't discuss it anymore. Nobody should, not in public, unless it's closed and just say there's nothing there. Yeah. Right. That'd be my thought.
I think that's a point well made, and I just want to caution us as we review this particular item in our monthly agenda to be aware of it. And we may want to come back and take a little bit more formal look with advice from Ms. Meadowskeef and Mr. Currington.
Okay, so the next sheet is the budget report, and let's see. I had a question about the campaign contribution refund program expenditures. It looks like for fiscal year 2017, we have Well, in 2016, we paid 19 claims in the amount of $465. In 2017, we've paid 3 in the amount of $70, and 2 are currently pending, and another one is, 2 more are pending, needing more information. 1 was withdrawn. So that's kind of the end of that. I'm going to actually compile a final report when we're completely closed out. I think that we were going to close it out officially sometime in April, but to the extent that we don't get any more forms in, we can close out sooner, and I can report on that.
Okay, thank you.
Who is JMK on the campaign contribution refund?
Me.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure. So gave to Jay.
Okay, the next item is, we had received some, I don't know if I'd ever presented these to you before, but one responsibility of this office is to monitor lobbyist registration with the city. So the city takes care of handling those, but I do get the reports. So just for your information, I included what those reports look like so you can see who the lobbyists are, what their particular interests are, especially based on some of the interest in lobbying going on in the Florida House. Lobbyists just seem to be getting a lot of attention lately, so I wanted to bring to your attention our folks, or the people that are lobbying the city.
Okay, good information.
I think that's it.
Any questions? Okay, that would close out the ethics officer report. Can we jump back to approval of minutes, Ms. Phillips?
Yes, I have 7 technical changes,
They're all just
all technical.
a box of semicolons, and it's fine? Mm-hmm. Okay, what I'd like to do then is take a motion to approve the minutes with Ms. Phillips' edits, which staff can make after the meeting, since they're not substantive, if that's all right with anybody. If anybody'd like to move approval of the minutes?
I move.
Okay,
Second.
Ms. Phillips and Mr. Friedman second. All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Okay, the minutes are approved. Item 5 is our monthly ethics moment. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you are on again.
Okay, I have actually 2 items. One is a brief item from Naples, and actually it's Palm Beach County. So in areas where there is an ethics office / inspector general structure set up within the county, different entities within that county can pay or are assessed a fee for the monitoring services of said inspector general or said county ethics commission. And here there was a court ruling that some cities in Palm Beach County don't have to contribute towards maintenance of the inspector general program. So that's an interesting court ruling, at least to me, because you hear about this going on elsewhere, that if you're uncomfortable with what the Inspector General or the Ethics Commission is doing, you could withdraw funding to said entity, therefore crippling said entity. So it's important, and it's actually a benefit to the way we're set up, that we're city funded. Charter amendment requires the city to sustain this operation. And so far, we've had a great relationship working with the city for funding. The other element I wanted to bring to...
Before you get off that, I note in this article it says that it may be appealed to the Florida Supreme Court. Would you throw in your tickler file to update us if there is a change in status on this? Because I think this is kind of an interesting fight between, I perceive it kind of between the cities and the voters, but that's another viewpoint.
And then finally, This is not in your materials, but it is a matter of interest to the Florida legislature this year, especially again in the House. They are considering several amendments to 112, and one that's interesting is that, as we discussed, municipal elected officials are only filing the Form 1, right, which is you don't have to disclose everything. So it's kind of the abbreviated, not full financial disclosure. In this proposed amendment to 112, the city commissioners would have to do the full financial disclosure that's required for senators, representatives, et cetera. So the county commission, those forms would be required for our city commissioners. So they are heightening or trying to heighten those requirements on municipal officers. And there are other things going on, including the lobbyist window. You could leave an entity and then 2 years later you could lobby. Here they're proposing that it be 6 years instead of 2. So that's going to dilute that relationship where you just get out, you have to wait 2 years, and a lot of those same folks are still there for you to know. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in the Florida House this year, but the one most notable is that full financial disclosure, Form 6.
What's the bill number?
Is a,
Is it a PCB?
yes, PCB, PIEC 17-03.
Okay, and just to remind people, the Form 1 and Form 6 are two different forms. Form 1 there's a couple of different ways to fill it out, but for most people with assets, they would simply disclose asset types that exceed a certain percent of their income or of their wealth. For a Form 6, you list very specifically each asset as well as its actual dollar value. With, again, some exclusions, but a variety of things that would have to be included. For instance, if you own something jointly with your spouse, you would put down that item and the full value. Mr. Friedman.
You know, it's a good idea. I know in the federal system, as a federal contract officer, I filed one of those things every year. So.
Talked about it.
And if anyone has any interest, you can go to the Florida Ethics Commission website, and they have all of their forms, and there are a number of them besides the 1 and the 6, and they're all annotated. So typically they're 2-page forms with about 4 pages of annotation. If anybody wants to see a Form 6, we have one here, or I don't know if we have copies, but we can certainly make copies if you want to see what that's all about. And that would conclude our ethics moment. Next on the agenda, and we're going to actually do 2 different things here. We are advised by Mr. Currington that Mr. Friedman submitted his resignation effective March 1st, 2017, but that we should take a formal action, since it was the board that appointed Mr. Friedman, that the board should take a formal action to accept his resignation. Now, if we vote no, Mr. Friedman, how much trouble are we in with your wife?
It's skinned alive,
Okay, well,
let me tell you. We've got a vacation planned in March, sir.
all right. Well, having been told by Mr. Friedman's wife how we will vote, all in favor of accepting Mr. Friedman's resignation effective March 1st, 2017, say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Your resignation is accepted.
Thank you.
What I'm going to wedge in here as item 6A is Ms. McNeil's term was up. We need to formally reappoint her in much the same way. Under our bylaws, obviously, we say that if you were on the board and you haven't done your 2 terms, you're eligible for the board, and we can't think of anyone we'd rather have stay than you. Without further laudatory statements. All those in favor of reappointing Ms. McNeil for a 3-year term, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign. And Ms. McNeil is reappointed for 3 years. Next, we have public comment on agenda items, if there is any. I'm seeing none. And then we move to update on the board member. Before Ms. Meadows-Keefe tells us where we are with filling Mr. Friedman's vacancy, I just want to tell you, after some thought and some discussion with staff, what it would be my intention to do is that we all get all of the applications before the next meeting, electronically, of course, and that the burden is on each one of us to come in with our top 2, 3, however many. Not, you can't come in with the whole stack and say, I like all 20 of these, or I personally will shoot you from whatever seat I'm sitting in. Your top couple recommendations, it would be my hope, whoever's chair next meeting, that we would simply share our recommendations, and if we've all got somebody, if 5 of us have somebody in our top 2 that we're kind of done and doesn't take a lot of time, and if it takes time, then we would spend whatever time we need discussing. So that is kind of a process, rather than, we had talked at one point about having like a committee of 1 do a pre-screen for us, but the more I thought about that and was advised by staff, that was one of my lesser quality ideas, let me just say, to avoid saying bad things on the microphone. Now, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you want to bring us up to date with where we are with applications, receiving, notifying, et cetera?
I will do so. One technical issue we had was that we needed to formally accept Mr. Friedman's resignation, I guess, before we could officially hit the media with the need for the application. Having said all that, though, I will let everyone know the application has been approved. The press release is ready to go, so the fact that we voted to accept Mr. Friedman's resignation, sadly, now triggers the ability of the city to advertise for the vacancy, so it is going out. There will be a newspaper advertisement on Sunday. It'll either be this Sunday or next Sunday, so watch the paper. If you know of anyone that is interested, direct them to that, and it will also be located on the TalGov website. The deadline for receipt of applications will be February 6th, 2017, and that's a deadline that will allow staff to verify that the applicant lives within the city of Tallahassee, which is a requirement. And after that preliminary screening, you guys will all get all applications. They'll be scanned and emailed to you for your review.
Questions, comments? One question I might direct at Mr. Currington. Mr. Friedman will still be on the board in February when we're making this decision. Does he participate in the decision for his replacement? I would think, since he's a board member, that he would, but just making sure that that's not odd.
My gut reaction is depends on when you actually vote.
Assuming we voted in February.
Plan to vote in February.
Then I believe you would.
Okay, just making sure, because Mr. Friedman's sage advice is always welcome.
I can live with whatever you're doing.
I'd take your parsley or rosemary advice, too. Okay, Committee of 1 reports. Mr. Friedman on investigators.
Okay, I pulled my notes because we did this early in November, and I don't know about you, but my memory's not that good. So we started off with a list of going to the state site in an attempt to identify folks who did investigations here, and their list is wonderful. You pull up about 30 names, then you go and you hit the thing to pull up the next 30 names, and 2 minutes later or so they pop up, and then you do the next 30 names, and 2 minutes later or so they pop up, and I made it through N, and I gave up. I mean, just nothing should be that hard. So at any rate, Julie and I talked about it, and she then provided me with a list, 5 or 6 contractors that look like they have done this kind of work before and would be quite capable of doing it. I went out and I called them all. One, I got an answering machine and never got a call back. Second one, I got a message, and then they didn't call back. Third one I talked to, and I won't mention any names, obviously. I was very impressed. The gentleman didn't have law enforcement background, but I think he'd be very good, and I'd be willing to, at some point, put that for you. I think he'd be good. Another one, a retired detective, investigator in Miami. I think he'd be quite good. Another one, they advised they were not covering Tallahassee, and another one is a retired FBI agent, and he would be interested. The only one that I ran by that they're not working for the city, which I think is something that we should do. We don't want someone working for the city and also for this board, because it's almost a given conflict, or at least appearance of impropriety, and I don't like that. So at any rate, he indicated he wasn't working for the city, and we did. I would then proceed, if you're interested in these ones, probably to go back to the other two, say, are you working for the city? And if they say no, or if you are, would you stop working for them and be willing to work for us? I mean, I have no idea. So that's where that stands. We went through a number of iterations of things, and I certainly will not go through all of them. The state list, for what it's worth, was folks with what is called a C license, and they are people who are trained investigators, and they've got a lot of experience. I wrote a note to Julie that I'll enter into record because I think it's worth it. I don't know whether did it go out to anyone else or not.
I don't believe so. What's the date?
November 8th. You probably
Okay.
don't remember either. That's all right.
Would it be okay with you, Mr. Friedman, if I updated you real fast on what we've been doing?
Why don't you let me read this
Okay,
first, then you can
okay.
do that. Hello, Julie. I agree that selecting an investigative company listed on the city's list of investigators without any idea of what personnel would be handling in our case is problematic. I also agree that a licensed private investigator who has significant law enforcement / administrative experience, having to defend his or her work in court or administrative hearing, is likely what we're seeking. Mike got in the way of the word. That's what we agreed to when we agreed to the standard for selection of investigators. We need assurance that whoever investigates for us meets these standards, which are likely to be higher than those set by the city. I imagine the city hires the firms on the list for surveillances and record checks, which is what most private investigators spend the majority of their time doing. Most of what the city encounters that's really sensitive is likely criminal in nature and investigated by detectives from the TPD, with direction furnished by the state's attorney's office. Failure to pursue each of our cases in a highly competent, thorough manner would render the results of an investigation to be flawed. Simply put, when an investigator, experienced investigator interviews, he or she often senses the best manner of interviewing each person based upon the person's demeanor, gestures, and a gut feeling as to how the person should be approached. When done right, the interviewer can induce most interviewees to cooperate. He or she can gain information an interviewee might not have intended to provide, or help them to recall information they had forgotten. Most folks respond best to a friendly approach. However, that's not always the case. Only an interviewer who's done many interviews possesses the ability to assess how to approach an interview, and often it's a snap decision that has to be made within moments of first meeting a person who's being interviewed. Also, knowing how far to pursue cases is critical. There is unquestionably a point at which an experienced investigator knows that additional interviews are not needed to ensure that all relevant information has been uncovered. It is not unlike legal research. When you conduct legal research, at a certain point, the information found becomes repetitive and feels somewhat circular. There's nothing new to be unearthed at that point. Nothing is more embarrassing, or perhaps I would say damaging, than finding out after a case is, quote, resolved, end quote, that there was information that was missed. I've seen it happen. It can erode the public's confidence in an agency or institution. We ought to hire investigators who possess significant experience in sensitive cases that have been subject to legal review and public scrutiny. We shouldn't chance having our investigators who have hiring investigators who have not done that. To make a comparison, though all attorneys are attorneys, we don't hire general practitioners to do tax work. Similarly, investigators are investigators, but we don't want someone who does public record checks to do sensitive interviews. And that's basically what I said. Now, bring us up.
Okay, and then Ms. Meadows-Keefe, I think you've been working with the city in terms of what can go out? If you could
Correct.
update us?
Yeah, I certainly can. In working with Mr. Friedman and with this board, we had developed basically a job description of the knowledge, skills, and abilities, educational background, licensure that this board was looking for in a pool of investigators. And ideally, I think the vision was that we have several investigators to choose from in a particular case. And after discussion with Mr. Friedman and the board, I believe we had settled on an RFQ process in order to make it more transparent to the citizens and fair to everyone. So I have been working with procurement, using our documents that we utilized to make up our job description, my conversations with Mr. Friedman, and working with Mr. Thriewitz, Robert Thriewitz. We are working to get an RFP out. The date when it's going to be issued is February the 6th. And it will be out on the website where they habitually advertise for contracts, and the name is escaping me at this point, which I apologize for. The deadline to receive those application packets will be February 14th. There is a meeting planned to evaluate those packages the week of February 20th. So I did want to bring to the board's attention that there's typically a panel of people to evaluate those proposals. So you ideally want about 3 or 4 folks on there. So what I'm bringing up before the board is that I plan to serve on that committee. I'm asking perhaps for the city auditor or one of his staff to be present to evaluate, perhaps someone from risk management, and then obviously I would like someone from this board to also participate. I did not want 2 or more members of the board on it, and ideally not the chair. So Mr. Friedman, if you would be available to serve on that committee to review, to participate in this process. You're obviously the board member that, I won't speak for the board, but that I would like to work with on this as your final kind of thing with the board so we can see it to fruition before you go.
Assuming it's before March 1, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Standing.
Okay, so that's the update on that.
And just because Ambrose Bierce is not here to write a book on government speak, an RFP is a request for proposal. That is where the potential vendors write a proposal that would include their qualifications, which was an RFQ is a request for qualifications, but they would do a proposal to us stating their qualifications, knowledge, skills, experience, et cetera, pricing the whole ball of wax.
May I ask a favor? When you do recall what the place is in the city site,
Yep.
would you let me know, please?
I will send you the link. There's also a reminder that once this proposal is out, there should be no communication with anyone, from anyone on this board to any proposed contractor. There is going to be a point of contact, and that will be Robert Thriewitz. That's Threewitts. His phone number is 891-8025. So if anyone calls you, wants to chat about this, he's going to be the point of contact for managing this particular procurement.
Okay. Our other Committee of One report is Ms. Phillips.
Thank you. As you know, I'm reviewing city policies and procedures for any possible updates that apply to ethics. And I've asked you members if you have any suggestions for reviewing certain policies and procedures, please let me know. Ms. Blair and I met with Julie to discuss human relations policies and procedures. updating those as they relate to our charter, the city's charter amendment for the Ethics Board. And she has wanted to, I guess, to discuss those today. In addition, there was some concern expressed at the last meeting that the fraternization HR policy had not been updated as the board had requested. So I believe Ms. Blair is here today to discuss that. She's on the agenda for that.
Right, and that leads us into the next item, and what I would do is refer you on item 13E is a letter that I sent at the board's direction. And I want to be real clear. We, after our first shade meeting, when we were still getting organized, we had talked about fraternization, and we had expressed some concerns in our board meeting. We never followed up with the city in any formal way, and we've had a couple of conversations in our meetings. One of our policies that I hope is going to come out of our self-evaluation is to be very clear in terms of communicating with the city, that we not simply expect them to know what we were talking about in our meetings, but that we follow up in writing. So this is, when we ask for an update from the city, it's not meant as a criticism for them not having known that we had talked about it and not ask them for anything specific. So with that as a lead-in, Ms. Blair, you're recognized to kind of tell us where the city is in developing its policy, which I understand we will get to see in its final form.
You will, as soon as we've completed it. And so what we have done in October of 2014, we immediately, after the ethics ordinance was passed and the charter amendment and those type of things, we immediately put into play with our employees a new revised loyalty oath, which is referenced in your ethics ordinance. We sent that out. We had all existing employees sign that form, return it to us so that we have that as part of their record. That was sort of the first step to making sure that everyone understands, you know, this is the new land, the new territory. Subsequent to that, I have worked with Ms. Phillips and Ms. Meadows-Keefe to identify areas in our existing personnel policies that could easily be that lended itself for inclusion of some of this ethical language. And what we have found, we found about 4 places where we felt was appropriate. One is with our preamble. What we would do is we would just simply take the charter language of the ethics charter, and we would adopt that into the city personnel policy. Another area we wanted to highlight is to make sure that employees understand that there's a prohibition of any type of personal gain or the perception of personal gain arising out of one's position and their personal life. So you don't want to have that perception. The third was we wanted to ensure that our employees, their supervisors, their managers understood that the ethics board is there for a resource, and here's the contact information, both phone numbers, websites, email address, to report a suspected violation. And we identify what perhaps those violations would be, such as a conflict of interest, a misuse of city property and time, a misuse of city positions, etc. The fourth was a reference. We would actually reference the required loyalty oath in our personnel policies. So not only do you sign that loyalty oath, which we do require for all new employees, but it's referenced in our policies so that everyone is on the same page as far as that. The other thing would be to remind employees that they may be subject to disciplinary action and review and or further action by the board itself. So depending on what the violation is, depending on what level of position that an employee holds within the city, they may have to appear before you in certain circumstances. These policies are currently in working draft form. We are sharing those with our executive management team and hope for adoption very soon. The fifth one, and I'll answer any questions, but it has to do with the chair's reference to the anti-fraternization policy. That has been drafted and is currently being reviewed by the city manager and his team. We do expect adoption soon. We've developed this primarily to address managers, department heads, officers in the city, and subordinates that they have direct or indirect supervision over. We are prohibiting that by policy, and individuals who engage in that behavior may be subject to discipline up to and including termination. You will also see, when I do have the finished policy in front of you, you will also see that it covers a paragraph covering peer to coworker relationships, in that what we found, which is more common in our workforce, is that coworkers will develop a personal relationship. They don't have supervisory authority, but what happens is sometimes that behavior falls over into the workplace and really interferes with the employee's ability to do the essential functions of their job. So that's going to be addressed in that same policy. That is pretty much what I have for you in terms of an update this afternoon. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sounds like a Christmas list to me. Any questions? Thank you. Oh, Ms. Phillips.
I don't have any questions, but I think those are really good, and I appreciate you moving forward and presenting them to the board.
Well,
So
thank you.
Thank
I
you
appreciate
very
your
much.
help.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Mr. Chairman? I had
Mr.
one
Davis.
question. I had just one question. In your study of this policy, have you found that it's pretty common around the state within other city governments?
I had a staff member review that. I don't recall specifically what communities have this kind of language, but it is not uncommon in other organizations that I've already been a part of.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just echo one thing. I'm delighted that you folks are addressing these things. I think that's superb. Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Blair, as before, thank you very much. We
Thank you.
much appreciate what you do. Oh. No. We are scheduled for a break. Before we get there, I want to point out one thing. The election of the chair and vice chair is low on the agenda, and that is not any attempt by me to hang on for an extra month, I guarantee you. But I want to make a suggestion that in future years, we need to elect the chair and vice chair in December. Because as Julie and I talked, if we elected a new chair at the beginning of the meeting and handed them the gavel, they would not have been involved in developing the agenda, and it would have been a difficult position to put someone in. So we need to elect someone and have them start as the new chair at the following meeting when they have direct control of Julie and the agenda. Not that anyone has control of Julie. Mr. Friedman.
What month did you assume chairmanship?
That was in January.
Was it in January? So you did the full year. I was just
yes, sir.
wondering because we had lost our
I'm getting 13 months, and it was, I guarantee you, was not intentional, although last month might have been a little difficult for us, given some of our turnover.
No, I had forgotten whether you had served the full year or, or not.
What is it in dog years?
In dog meetings. Okay, with that, we will take a break until, is it 4:55? What time does that say?
4:55.
4:55 until 5:10.
And we're going to elect the chair after the break.
Yeah.
Right,
Not right after, I'm going to do.
okay, right, okay.
I'm going to do 12. Okay, we are back. Item 12 on our agenda is two basically technical revisions to our, well, maybe not so technical, our bylaws. The first one is in Article 3D. I think these are basically both the same thing, but in Article 3D, changing training to education, since we don't train people. We've been advised, we educate them. This is the second time that we have seen this, so this is the meeting at which we would adopt it. Unless there are questions or comments, all in favor of the change to our bylaws, Article 3D, say yay. Yay.
Yay.
Opposed, like sign. That one's adopted. And the next one is in Article 5A. It's the same thing, primarily Julie's responsibility to educate rather than to train. Same change. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. That is adopted. What I'd like to do, Ms. Phillips is
Lucy.
not in her seat.
She's over with Lucy. Okay.
Oh. To accommodate your schedule, I'm going to talk real slow. To accommodate Ms. Phillips' schedule, she has to leave a little early, and I want to make sure that she is here when we elect, I guess is the word, the new chair and vice chair. Since we don't have a vice chair at the moment, that was Mr. Ochtayo, and my term is well and fully over. And if I talk, maybe I could spell the words. We need to put you on that end of the table. Oh, I'm sorry, you're working on minutes. Yes. You were trying to finish last month. See, I'm a month ahead of you. I'm on this month. Okay. We're on, I've jumped to item 15. We'll come back to 13 and 14. But if we run long, I did not want to omit item 15, election of the chair and vice chair. So nominations, recommendations, lambs to the slaughter.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Davis.
So you're asking for nominations now?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'd like to nominate Richard Herring as our continuing chairman and Sonny Phillips as vice chair.
Oh,
Ms.
second
Phillips,
that.
I saw a smile and a grimace. You're recognized.
well, I was going to second that motion.
You were going to?
I'll make it easier. I'll second it.
Do we have anything in the bylaws about accepting motions? Can I not recognize? No. Ms. Phillips, are you okay with that motion?
I'm okay with the first part. No, I'm fine with it. That's fine.
Well, Ms. Davis, I used to like you.
Move the question.
You're not recognized.
All right, then I'll move the question.
I don't think you're recognized either. I don't think I recognized you for a second, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I loud enough?
Yes,
Okay, I've been told I've
whisper sometimes.
been talking too softly. Mr. Davis has moved and Mr. Freeman has seconded. It's a good thing you're on your way out, or you might be anyway. Me and Ms. Phillips as the lambs for the year. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. Aye. Okay. By a simple majority, I guess that one passes. Yeah, I smell your fingerprints here somewhere. Okay. Item 13.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Carrington has a...
Mr. Currington.
Yes, you spoke earlier about possibly setting the date for the election for December.
Yes.
I'm looking at the bylaws now, and they appear to be silent, but in Article 4, it talks about, it's Article 4, capital A, the number 3, the board shall elect from their members a chair and vice chair. It's silent as to the timing, so I don't know if you want to propose maybe a change there to insert a time frame.
Okay, if I could get Ms. Meadows-Keefe to bring us a draft of that for the next meeting, just so we don't end up in the position that I was worried about with either in the future somebody serving a longer term and somebody a shorter term, or somebody trying to take over a meeting that they weren't prepared to chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself.
Oh, wait a minute.
Boy, like Paul Harvey, now you hear the rest of the story.
Yes, sir.
Paragraph capital D, terms. Officers shall be elected for a term of 1 year at the first meeting of the board in each calendar year.
Oh,
Well, then that would need to be changed.
huh?
So we did it right this year.
We did it right. Like a blind squirrel.
Well, I've been compared to worse. So, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, if you would bring us a draft that'll fix us up.
So you want to do it in December, at the last meeting in December?
In December to take office in January, so that they can have the month to have control of the agenda and make sure that they are fully prepared. Item 13, remember we started in November doing a self-evaluation, and we basically had two categories of things we wanted to do. One was to make recommendations to ourselves as a board for things that we needed to improve, which is item G, and the other was to come up with any, if there were any, recommendations to the city for things that could be changed in policy, in ordinance, or in the city charter. What I'd like to do, because my perception from December is that when I had hoped we'd finish this, actually, you see what a competent chair you elected, was that we would finish those in December. I thought we were pretty close on item G, so if we could go to G and start there. That's a 2-page, I think, numbered items 1 through 8, yes. It says possible recommendations for board actions. These would be the result of our self-evaluation, these would be recommendations that we are making to ourselves, basically, concerning things that we can do better in the future. One of which, item 7, is the concept of communicating formally to the city when we have a discussion about something over which we have a concern, rather than hoping they will intuit from the video vibe that we would like them to look at something. If anybody does anybody have any comments, questions, additions, deletions on those 8 numbered items?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Davis.
I had one thought, and I know we mentioned that we discussed this in one of the previous meetings, and I think it would go under here. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I still think it would be helpful for this board to communicate to the public in some form with just a summary of some of the things that are being done and have been done to date in the history of this board. I find that when I run into people in the community from time to time who ask questions about this board, for example, they don't realize the educational part of what's being done by the ethics officer. And they're very encouraged when they hear that. And so I still think that a bullet point type brief report somehow to the public would be helpful. So I just offer that as an idea.
I have a
Okay.
comment.
Ms. Meadows Keefe.
Pursuant to that, and pursuant to the responsibility of my office to generate ethics education for the public, I think they call it a handbook, but I have a meeting scheduled on Friday with the communications director, and I'm actually going to try to set up a communication strategy for the board. So it's not just going to be like a PDF FAQ document, but I actually want to try to get a little innovative with it. 85% of social media content in the future will be delivered via video. So I like these explainer videos that the Speaker of the House has used. He's made some really good explainer videos for the public that are about 1 minute long that explain things like conflict of interest, et cetera. So in combination with revamping our webpage to have our YouTube videos of our meetings, if people are in need of sleep assistance, they can view our meetings from start to finish, as well as meeting minutes and links all in a handy-dandy location, and then work on perhaps producing some videos for the public's edification as well as a written guide. But I do find people are reluctant sometimes to read paper, but it seems like the younger folks and most demographics now like video. So I have that meeting set up with communications, and I will report back to you, because I agree with Mr. Davis that part of why I like to get out personally is to even educate our own employees and board members in the community about what it is we're doing, and they're always happy when they hear it. So trying to capitalize on that and move forward.
Okay. Any other, I see a mic going down, Ms. Phillips.
On 6 and 7, it says adopt a bylaw, pretty much allowing any member of the board to propose to whom? I mean, propose a recommendation to the board and then the city commission?
I think that probably should better read it, propose to the board making a recommendation to the city commission.
Okay, that's for 6 and 7 then, because
Okay.
it's not clear. Okay.
Why would you need a bylaw to do that? Couldn't someone just do that anyway?
I
In other words,
think probably.
This is something I feel strongly about, Richard. I think the board ought to consider writing a letter. I think we just did that.
Right.
Didn't we last month?
Right. I think the idea was to kind of enshrine, much in the same way that we've sort of enshrined our ability to self-initiate a complaint, to just put it in our bylaws just to be crystal clear.
Well, it doesn't do any harm, obviously.
Right, right. And I think we already have, but in the future, it's something that we ought to, and part of it also is taking the burden on ourselves to make sure, I guess it was back in late 2015, that we talked a little bit about fraternization. We had a shade meeting, and we had some pretty lengthy discussion among ourselves, but we never followed up in anything in writing to the city. So part of this, the reason for the bylaw would be to remind ourselves to communicate formally.
Fine.
If what I would, if there are no other comments, what I would hope to get is a motion to accept these with Mr. Davis's addition as recommendations, and we bring them back fixed up at the next meeting for editing. But basically, we would have adopted them, but for editing. So we would finish our the recommendations to ourselves, part of our self-evaluation.
Yeah, and with that change in 6 and 7.
Right, right. And there would, I'm sure there's other things that could get cleaned up. So we would do that. If someone would like to move that.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Friedman moves, Ms. Phillips seconds. So that would, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign. So we now will have adopted 9 recommendations to ourselves, some of which require further action, which will fall on Ms. Meadows-Keefe to ding us on, and also put this back on our next agenda, and we'll get it in final proper, we'll etiquette and grammar it up a little bit.
Because you drafted it, right?
If it's wrong, probably yes.
I just want Sonny to know.
Okay, we then have items A through F. Probably, how about A through D and F? I think item E is premature until we see the city policy. So I would kind of arbitrarily take it off the list right now, but on items 13, A, B, C, D, and F, Ms. Phillips, at the last meeting, you asked that we get a side-by-side, or they be displayed in a side-by-side format. These are provisions from the state ethics laws and from various city and county ethics ordinances in areas that have been topics of discussion before this board: misuse of position, outside employment, lobbyists, gifts, and something very specific to us, which is our lack of a 7th board member. What I'd like to do, if we can, is these would be, if there are any, that would probably come out of these categories, recommendations from this board to the city to take some future action. So if I could get Ms. Meadows-Keefe to walk us through A, B, C, D, and F, and at the end of each one, I'm going to stop us for comments, questions, and if we can get agreement on anything, then we'll be one step closer.
I did not expect to do the walkthrough.
Bob?
However, since I'm dealing with a new chair, I do want to do this appropriately. You had, Mr. Chair, asked me, I believe, to get from the city the process for amending the charter, and also for proposing additional or amending existing ordinances. That did come from you, I believe. And the concern or the issue that would need amendment of the charter, from what I think we have all heard, unless I'm mistaken, is that to address the 7th member that we were supposed to have pursuant to the charter amendment, we could not simply, through an ordinance or a bylaw, say for the 7th member it's going to be a board appointment or it's going to be the public defender's office. That would need to get formally amended in the city charter. I see the city attorney back there. Is that correct?
Okay, let me restate. We've kind of jumped to 13G.
Okay, sorry.
The issue for the board has been that the charter amendment foresaw a 7-member board with 1 member to be appointed by the chief judge. That is a conflict for the chief judge, and he or she cannot appoint. I think that all of us, based on our prior discussions, would like to have that seventh member, and we believe that would take an amendment to the charter. So what I think is our recommendation to the city is that the next time that they do amendments to the charter, that they consider language that would allow that seventh appointment to be made in an appropriate fashion. It could be made by the other 6 members of the board, much as we appoint 2. It could be made by a different appointing authority. I don't know that we, as a board, I have heard any great discussion that we care, other than we get a legitimate 7th brain up here, or because you have me, maybe a legitimate 6th brain up here. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Friedman?
I think that's accurate. We just don't want to be in a situation where the board, if you get a situation where an appointing authority under the charter refuses to make the appointment, we need to have some alternative to fill the board out, because suppose FSU and Florida A&M, refuse to make their appointments, we wouldn't have a quorum. Because we're supposed to have 7 at that point. Well, I guess we would. We'd have 4. But, I mean, we need to have the ability to go beyond if they don't appoint. And I think we went further, did we not, in our discussion, than just the chief judge's appointee, who will never be, at least with this chief judge. Maybe the next one might want to.
I think it's probably going to be true with any chief judge, Mr. Freeman.
But, I mean, we need to have some way of making sure that we have a reasonably full board. And if the folks who are supposed to make the appointments refuse to do their duty, so to speak, we would like an alternative.
I think there's 2 things. I think one is the holdover issue, that if an appointing authority did not reappoint, whether that board member that's sitting there would be able to continue. So I think that's issue 1, how we would need to handle that. Would that need to be an ordinance, or would that need to be in charter in terms of carryover? Say that A&M had not made an appointment. Would it be legitimate for that board member to continue? So I think that's the first issue. The second issue is that 7th member that we've never had. So you have the carryover question and you have the 7th member question, and how those would need to get handled.
And I'd suggest there's a way to skin both those cats with one knife, and that, boy, that's a bad metaphor.
Yeah.
But that would be to have something in the charter that says that if any position is vacant for more than X days, that the board, the remaining members of the board, can appoint someone to fill that seat unless or until such time as the appointing authority acts. So that would cover both inaction by an appointing authority or the unavailability of an appointment. But I think we have agreement that that is something we would want to recommend to the city. Am I seeing 5 nodding heads? So that we would have 7 members here? Okay. So I think we can agree on that, and we'll work. Julie, you and I can work on final language on that, and I certainly, my personal view on any of these recommendations is that we simply make broad recommendations to the city rather than try to wordsmith stuff, because they got some pretty smart people, and ultimately we're asking them to do work that benefits us, and I would like to leave them the leeway to land a place that they're comfortable and not have us say, well, you didn't do exactly what we asked, because that simply sets us both up for failure. Okay, so Julie, near down now to on A through D, and the question would be on each one of these whether this board would like to make a recommendation to the city about something concerned. Probably all 4 of these relate to either the current city policies or the jurisdiction of this board on these 4 items.
Okay, so I think I'm clear on how you want this presented. We have had an opinion from our council that this board does not have concurrent jurisdiction with the Florida Ethics Commission. So the question is, in response to folks who have said they would like to see the current city ethics code enhanced, what provisions can be added to, for lack of a better word, beef up our city ethics code? So the board focused on several issues. The one that's first is that of misuse of public position. And Ms. Phillips requested that we have this side by side to compare what the Florida Ethics Code defines as misuse of position. And then for your reference, we have language that's utilized by Jacksonville and that used by Palm Beach County that seems to remove that corrupt intent or corrupt use language. In speaking with staff from the Ethics Commission, they have for years, I think, felt like that corruptly use makes it difficult to obtain appropriate results. Sometimes in cases that corrupt intent proof is hard. So I think in a perfect world, sometimes they'd like to take that corruptly out. So as the board considers whether it wants to make a higher standard for misuse of position, they may consider adopting language similar to that used in the Ethics Code in Florida, taking out the corrupt language, or to pattern it more after the Jacksonville or Palm Beach County language. And I would note, looking at Palm Beach, they define kind of some family relationships on prohibited conduct. In Jacksonville, they add kind of an intentionality standard to it. And then they also add some limits on what you can borrow or lend to a subordinate or higher ranking employee. So they've got some different ideas for you to consider.
Mr. Currington, I know you had a comment about adopting provisions that are identical to the Florida ethics laws or provisions that vary. Would you like to comment, or would you like me to withdraw my question?
I would like to comment. Obviously, this is a policy decision to be made by the City Commission. My only thought was that in making that policy decision, the closer you track the state ethics law, the less likely you will have declaratory judgments and other challenges about the meaning of the city's ethics code. So if you tweak it and change a word from corruptly to intentionally, then you're likely to face litigation about what intentionally means rather than corruptly means. So mimicking the state statute might avoid legal fees in the future, but that has to be balanced against the policy considerations. I'm just talking about forewarning you about legal implications if you change the language. And by the same token, a lot of the terms in the state ethics code now have been clarified by the courts. So even if we don't quite understand what corruptly means, we better understand it than when it was first passed. And to the extent this board has said repeatedly, we're not out to punish as much as we are to prevent bad behavior. So we want this prophylactic effect. So if people understand in advance what they're prohibited from doing, hopefully we'll have more ethical behavior by the boards and public officials and so on. So I think having that clearer language will do a better job of instructing public officials. And then thirdly, you've got some uniformity. If you're a county official or a city official or a state official, and you're dealing with the state ethics code and the local ethics code, and they're not the same, again, the possibility of more confusion. If you have 2 or 3 jurisdictions with authority over you, the more uniformity, the more clarity.
Okay. And to piggyback on one thing that Ms. Meadows-Keefe said, in her conversations with staff about the use of the word corruptly, well, I know staff at the State Commission on Ethics have some concern. And I haven't looked at what their formal legislative recommendations are for 2017, but in 2016, it's my recollection that they did not recommend changing the word corruptly. So while it has
So many times.
it has posed something of a problem at the staff level, but the commission either has not or has given up on trying to address that term. So just be advised that they are where they are. So I guess the question for the board members is, do you have a preference for any of, is misuse of position something that you think belongs within the jurisdiction of this board? Do you have a preference for any one of these three, or would you want to make just a blanket recommendation to the city that we think that some provision related to our jurisdiction and misuse of position would be appropriate? If that's not the world's most difficult question, I think I can make it worse. Ms. Phillips.
I've tried to quickly review these, and that's not an easy thing to do. If you're talking about just the first one, in my opinion, Palm Beach County is too complicated. I mean, I just gave up. And I'm not sure if you want to. I'd really like more time to review these, I guess. But if we have to make a decision tonight on or any of them, again, I've gone through the first one, but on Jacksonville's language, I think C is just going way too far. But I think with them putting the HR putting their policies in place where they actually directly state that any misuse of position pretty much covers misuse of public position. Now, do we need it so do they need to add it at this point? I don't know legally if that's the case.
Well, that wouldn't affect our jurisdiction. So
Okay, got it.
I think that the question here has been that a number of members over the last year or longer have commented that the jurisdiction that is set out for us in the current ordinance is pretty limited. We've had a couple people come before us and say, we think you ought to look at this, and we look at our jurisdiction and we say we don't have any authority to look at that. So I think that's...
Okay, so given that, I would go with section 112.313 would be what I would recommend that we propose to the city. And that would give them direction. I think giving your idea of giving them, say, we would like to see something changed is a good idea. I think they should review these as well. And
Yeah,
but
I'm just concerned that we could spend hours doing wordsmithing, and
Well,
we're going to make a
exactly.
recommendation to them, and they're going to say, oh, we got the topic, and they're going to wordsmith it themselves anyway.
right, so I think your idea is good, but boy, I hope if they do develop something, I hope it's not something like Palm Beach County.
Mr. Friedman.
I almost think, in a sense, it's almost cart before the horse. I think what we need to do probably is establish truly what things we think need to be within our powers first, and then review statutes, because I think that seems to me a more logical way of approaching it. And maybe we might want to talk a little bit to the city and see what they'd be willing to have us have jurisdiction over.
Well,
Because something like this, misuse of public position, administratively can be dealt with by human resources. Someone violates a policy they got, they're going to terminate them. I mean, if it's serious enough, or otherwise discipline them. I don't know, but I think we better determine what things we want to specifically have jurisdiction on and make sure that those will fly before.
well, and this list of A through D is kind of what has come out of our November and December discussions, where we started looking broadly at the state ethics law and ordinances from, what, 6 different local jurisdictions? I mean, I'm hoping that we have sort of narrowed it. Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that we have, my perception along the way is we're missing some meat on the bones in regard to the provisions of the City of Tallahassee Ethics Code that would allow this board to accomplish what we were asked to do by the citizens through the referendum that was passed. And this put meats on the bones in a helpful way. I believe every one of these would be things that I would be very comfortable with and would hope we could recommend to the city. And I kind of like what our general counsel said, that there's a lot of, at least some confidence in what the Chapter 112 has already adopted and the courts have often interpreted. And it sets it out in a short and sweet sort of basis, but there's some other case law and interpretation of words like corruption that would help guide the process if we were ever having to apply it. So I would strongly hope that we could recommend this to the city, and hopefully the city would adopt these 4 recommendations in some form.
Okay. Comments? Okay,
So it's 5, right?
I was looking at A through D. And then F, I think we've already sort of staked out ground on. As a board, we'd like to have a 7th member.
Right.
Ms. Meadowski, if you talk to us briefly about misuse of position, you want to go through the, you want to look at B on outside employment or conflicting employment?
I did want to look at that, and I think we had talked about that at several meetings. An issue that we have seen here is sometimes the perception that a job that an employee or official has outside of the city may present a perceived conflict of interest with their city job. So there have been some matters that have come to the board's attention related to outside employment, methods of tracking outside employment, where I would go to know who has a second job and where. So there, in front of you, we have the, again, State Ethics Code 112.313 that talks about what work is appropriate for an officer to hold outside of their official employment or position. So there, as requested, is the state provision. Now, if you are wanting to get a little bit more specific, I have included, again, Jacksonville's language, and they're pretty specific about what is concerning to them. Whereas the Florida statute seems to be very broad and subject to interpretation, Jacksonville really is pretty clear about it and requires that it be disclosed and tracked. And I do know that at the state, at the agency where I was, I had to receive all of those and keep a record of who had outside employment, and actually there was some approval that had to go on. So I don't see that's necessarily happening here. So Jacksonville does have that requirement. And it looks like Dade County has a similar requirement. So while the state statute seems very broad, there are other local governments that have provisions that are narrower and are at least a way of tracking who's doing what outside of the city employment.
Okay. And this is an issue that came before us some time ago concerning referrals by folks who might do city inspections, and I think the city's done a very good job of ensuring that there's no untoward activity there.
Well, and different departments within the city do an effective job. For example, building inspectors cannot do construction work anywhere in Leon County, I believe. So department by department, there may be specific rules pertaining to employees that can or can't do certain things. And I know in relation to the energy auditors, I think what happened out of that was that if you audit a home, you can't subsequently service that home through your private business. Likewise, if you've installed a system in a home, you can't subsequently audit that system. So department by department, the city's been responsive to those concerns, but just an overall tracking of people's outside employment may be something the board thinks is helpful in being proactive, and maybe some specific education could be directed to those employees that have outside employment.
Questions? Questions or comments? Okay, let's go to the lobbyist chart. And this is one that basically requires registration of lobbyists, and we've already seen the city's list of registered lobbyists.
And I got a question on this today from someone, I can't recall who it was. But the reason this even came out is that we don't have an issue with anything the city's done with defining a lobbyist or registering lobbyists. There has been confusion, though, I think on the part of the public about, well, if I want to go talk to my commissioner about an issue that bothers me in my neighborhood, do I have to register as a lobbyist, and just who has to register? So what Jacksonville went ahead and did is it said who doesn't have to register as a lobbyist. So for this, it was just a point of information really for the public, for them to know that a lobbyist registration requirement should not chill them from going to their elected commissioner and voicing concerns or appearing at a meeting to talk about an issue.
Okay, in terms of the City of Tallahassee does not have a list like this of who's excluded? Is that what you're saying?
No. What I'm saying is the city does register lobbyists. It does define a lobbyist. I think it's very clear how they define lobbyists, but I think what it does lack is who doesn't have to register as a lobbyist. So maybe I'm not being clear enough, but I've had people that aren't getting paid that are concerned about an issue, want to know if they have to register as a lobbyist to communicate about an issue of concern to them. And so for me, it was more giving the public a comfort level that they can go talk to their elected official without having to register as a lobbyist.
Okay, I know in the state law, when I worked for the state, the key factor always was that you were compensated.
You're
for it.
compensated,
So
correct.
if I go in as a volunteer, if I go in as the president of an organization, but I serve as president for that organization as a volunteer, I'm not lobbying. If I go in as a member of the parent-teacher organization, but I'm not paid for that, then I'm not lobbying. Whereas if I'm a school employee and I go in and I work for the district, then I may well be lobbying if I'm being paid, if I'm being compensated for the time I spend at the Capitol.
So Jacksonville just goes ahead and says the following people don't have to register. So that just gives the public some clarity and comfort, I guess. And that was something that board had talked about.
Is lobbying something that really needs to be within our jurisdiction?
Well, it is in the charter amendment that we monitor lobbyist registration. I mean, it does exist.
Okay, so that's the link, is because we're already 1 foot into lobbying.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Okay. And then D is gifts.
Correct, and so, again, it's just comparing the standard in the state ethics code regarding gifts, and we've talked about that extensively, what 112 says, and whether the city, we would like to see the city adopt something that's stricter Then that's set forth in 112.313. And so in Palm Beach County, they actually aggregate the value of gifts in a calendar year from a particular donor, so that you can't accept more than $100 in gifts in 1 year from a particular entity. That does not exist in the state ethics code. So they beef that up. And then they have some additional provisions for vendors and lobbyists and principles of lobbyists. And again, they're aggregating the value of those gifts.
Mr. Friedman.
What is the definition of anything of value? State of Florida. Those words of art. Sounds to me like the state is actually tighter than $100, because I would consider something of value to be something maybe over $5, $10, $20. I don't know. That's the reason I'm asking.
I know certainly for a state legislator, when they go into a meeting, if there's bottles of water in the back, when they pick up the bottle of water, they're expected to drop $1. So a value pretty much means a value. Now, there are some minor exclusions for things, and there are ways, there are some specific things you're allowed to take for an honorarium if you're doing a presentation.
I think my point is I like the state one best on this one, without a doubt. I think you're talking something of value. You're not talking a cup of coffee, but you are talking.
Well, I think they
you
are
could be
talking a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
Yeah. It gets that specific.
it's fine if that's how it's been interpreted.
Comments, questions?
What is covered currently with the city as a gift, the amount, or is there one?
Well, they're governed by the state law, which
Okay.
requires the reporting of
Right.
gifts if you are a RIPE. So if you are a reporting individual or a procurement employee, so those limits apply. In the city policy, gifts to employees are limited to $50 or below. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So what this enhanced.
You mean $50 or above?
Yes, sorry. So what Palm Beach County does, in effect, is it would say to a commissioner, you couldn't take more than $100 from the Acme Corporation in total for the year. So it maxes you out from a particular donor. The state law does not. So you could take more than $100 from Acme Corporation in a calendar year, as long as you disclosed that on your quarterly gift disclosure form. Am I correct on that? Okay.
Excuse me, man. Maybe I'm not too swift, but, so you're telling me that someone in Palm Beach could take a $99 gift and it'd be okay for Palm Beach, but they'd be in violation of the state law? Because they're a public official. Is that how I'm reading it?
There are some exclusions under the state law.
For cities?
Yeah, well, no, just there are broader exclusions in a variety of different circumstances.
Oh.
And we'd have to
Okay.
we'd have to spend some time going through all the detail on that, but it's not.
Legislators have different standards, too.
It's not. There are some things that you're allowed to take under certain circumstances, but we'd need to put a matrix in front of you. I'm trying to figure out how to land this plane. So what I think I'm hearing, if I go through these four: misuse of position. We already heard from Ms. Blair that they are making some outstanding changes in their policies and procedures, but we are interested in having something within our jurisdiction on conflicting employment. We think that it is I perceive that the board members like the idea of the city tracking outside employment in some way, and that we, as a policy for them, and that we also think that that's something that might fall within our jurisdiction at some point in the future. On lobbying, that it might be good for the city to look at specifically stating who is excluded from having to be a lobbyist or under what circumstances a person, because certainly if I'm paid to lobby for somebody for a business for a certain action, but I also want to come in and complain about something to the city that affects me personally, then I wouldn't be lobbying, so I could potentially wear both hats. And that again, that is something where we think might arguably fall within our jurisdiction at some point in the future, and that for gifts, we think there is advantage in the city having stricter, and I think I think they have some policies in place already, but generally having stricter gift prohibitions than the state statute, and again, expanding our jurisdiction. Do those sound like reasonably what we've been saying? I'm getting some nodding. Let me do this then. Ms. Meadows-Keefe and I will work on a short letter to the city that we will have at the next meeting for everyone to look at. And it will be along the lines, as a couple of you have said, of something broad. We won't say to the city, we think you ought to do in any great detail this, that, or the other that is carefully wordsmithed. We will talk in a broader perspective about kind of improving the ethics landscape and talking about our jurisdiction. And we'll put that in front of everybody and see if it's something that, without being more than a page or two in length, we can get agreement on, and we can end a lengthy self-evaluation process, if I'm getting nods. I think I got 5. Mr. Friedman.
Is there any way to get a sense of what the city would be comfortable with?
The attorney here.
My impression is that we would be putting them on the spot, and it's not something they're probably going to, I mean, the staff might make a recommendation, but they're not going to discuss that with us because they're going to want to make recommendations to their bosses. The city committee, I don't know they would show their hand. The city attorney's here. Do you think that we are off the reservation at this stage?
I obviously have not talked with the commissioners about that. My impression is from prior discussion before the existing structure was settled, that they did not want to go beyond what was in state law, and they would interpret as duplicative and unnecessarily so in terms of expense to simply have a local agency that did the same thing as the state agency.
Okay, so on the record, and throw something at me if I missummarize, but I think what you just said was you haven't discussed this directly with your employer, but that in the discussions that the city had prior to the creation of this board, they did not want to go beyond state law and did not see a need to duplicate state law at the local level. Is that a fair summary? Okay. Okay, well, I think, Mr. Friedman, I think that gives you the temperature.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to hope we would have.
Okay.
I mean, I think we should go through and do what we think ought to be done regardless, but it's good to know the temperature.
Okay. Mr. Davis, you have a look on your face like there are words building up.
Well, I'm just I'm trying to look back at the referendum and kind of take that as a lead on what we're doing here. And obviously, we're charged with working to assist the city commission in the development of the ethics code. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to do to assist them. But we have a job to do. And so at some point, we're going to have to do our job and make a recommendation. And then it's in the city's position to do as they see fit.
Yes, sir.
But I wouldn't want us to fail to do our job and independently do our job. And yet the language of the referendum is we're we're not in this alone. We're working together, and I appreciate that togetherness. We ought to be able to work together to fashion something that's meaningful. But
Okay.
at some point, I guess somebody's got to take the initiative to make some recommendation and then see where it goes.
Okay. And Mr. Smith, I realize we sort of threw you in the deep end here in this meeting. So some of this stuff we've been chewing on for a couple of months, but is there, do you have any words of wisdom for us, or are you willing to wait and see what Ms. Meadows-Keefe and I can come up with for the next meeting?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next meeting. Also give me an opportunity to review some of the documents that we have and look at the language in some of the other jurisdictions.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. With that, we're going to close out item 13 for this month. Let's not make it lucky 13 next month. Let's see if we can come up with a better number. As always, I will ask if there's anything that any member of the board would like to have on the agenda for next month that we haven't already planned on. I'm seeing nothing new. And then, and certainly if there is anything, you can't communicate with me, but Ms. Meadows keeps a running list. She has a whiteboard in her office of items that, need to be brought up. Some of them are specific to certain times of the year. And if you communicate with her, I'm sure that, much of the agenda she just says she tells me we need to do these things. And I know they're wise items, and they just get put on. Mr. Friedman.
I beg your pardon. There is one thing that
Yes, sir.
I need to ask, and I just want to know before I go and do something I shouldn't do. Several of these contractors, potentially investigators, asked me if we were going to, advertise. I said I had no idea when. They said, would you let me know when you do? Can I let them know as long as it's before the 6th?
I think you can let them know the website to check.
All right, if you will send me the website to check,
I will send you the
make phone
website to
calls,
check.
Because I hate to promise somebody something and not do it, but if it's not legal, I won't do it.
Well, I don't think there's harm in sending them, here is where you need to check for the proposal.
That's fine. Thank you.
Language is escaping me at this hour, but
All right, that works for me.
Okay, that sounds fair. Mr. Currington, that sound fair to you?
okay.
Okay, and we've announced already that since Mr. Friedman's already done some work and talked to some people, it's fair for us to close the loop, I think. Ms. Phillips?
For proposed agenda items, Julie, did you mention something about the handbook? Or that you're meeting on that? So,
I am meeting with Allison Ferris on Friday to talk about a communication plan. And that will be a comprehensive communication plan for the board, which would include a handbook. But I don't think a handbook is really what I would think is the best tool. I think that's the word that's used, but I want to create informational products for the public. And, I think of a handbook, I think of a bound document with 30 pages in it that no one really is going to read. But yes, so I plan to report back to the board on that meeting and what the plan is in February.
okay, I think as part of our charter, it requires us to develop a handbook. Am I right?
It calls it a handbook.
I know, that's
Right.
why I'm making the point.
So I don't know what you call, what defines a handbook. So, it'll be something in written form that's available, but I don't really think that's enough. I think what we need to do is
agree.
go beyond that. But we will get a written product out and on the internet.
Okay.
Okay.
Make sure you call the handbook.
I will call it a
Whatever it is in the charter. 'Cause
yes, it will be called what it needs to be called. I also want to bring up for February that I've put it off a few times because we've been busy, but we had an issue come up that the auditor took up related to housing programs, and an audit was performed, and he's concluded the audit, and he's going to come in February and talk about that, because it was actually an issue that came into the ethics office, and it was another collaborative effort that resulted in a pretty substantive audit. So he's going to come in February and talk about that. And I wanted to remind the board members that next month we are meeting at a different time and a different day. So that's Thursday, February 23rd, from 11 to 2 here in the chamber. So that's a Thursday, February 23rd, from 11 to 2. And the other respectful request I would make to the board is that we still do not have a date for our September meeting, and we're being preempted by, I think, a blueprint committee. So bring bad dates, or you can submit bad dates to me via email, dates when you absolutely cannot do it. And then Lucy will work to get this chamber and everybody together for our September meeting. So if I could respectfully ask for you to send me or Lucy dates that you do not want to meet so we can arrive at an appropriate time, date, and location.
Okay, the last thing on our agenda is public comment on non-agenda items. So if anybody out there has anything that you would like to talk about? No? Our next meeting, as was just announced, is Thursday, February 23rd from 11 to 2. That is because there is a conflict with this room, which is the only way that we can get the meeting taped. So beginning then in March, at least through August, we will be back at our regular time here on Tuesdays from 4 to 7. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, we are adjourned. Sign these things.